Human tissue types. Talking about tissues, anatomy, physiology. Remember, cells make up tissues. Tissues are things made up of the same type of cell. So the first type of tissue we're going to talk about is the first thing we see when we look at someone. That's called epithelial. Epi is upon on the outside, like epicenter. Remember, epigastric is above your stomach. So epithelial literally means epi upon your covering. So it covers and lines you. When you look at someone, pretty much everything you see on them is epithelial tissue. From the epithelial tissue, the hair is part of it, all the skin. Down below we have examples in cartoon fashion of the different types of epithelial. I'll talk about the simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, the stratified squamous epithelial, the pseudostratified columnar, and the transitional. I will not talk about stratified cuboidal because it gets a little confusing when you look at it with the stratified squamous. All right, the results from last year. This year's results aren't up. Flip class, you'll click on this to watch this in the PowerPoint once I get done with this and put it on. All right, epithelial tissue. The first function of epithelial tissue, since it's on the outside of us, is to protect. The outside of your skin, you can scratch it and you flake off dead skin cells because they fill up with protein as they go to the top, and they form little armor-like plates, little tiny plates, that then slough off as you scratch them and make dust in your house. The second function, along the same lines of protection, like from scratching, is defense against bacteria and viruses. So it serves as a barrier. You got bacteria all over the outside of your skin. They're not making it into your living tissue because once they think they're getting in, those dead cells again slough off, become dust, taking the bacteria right with them. They do permit passage of materials. Your very thin layer of epithelial tissue in your lining of your lungs and the alveoli allow for oxygen and carbon dioxide to go across the cell. Same thing in blood vessels. They're made up of epithelial tissue. And that allows fluid and oxygen to go across those little thin cells as well. Cells are so thin. They're thinner and thin. Can't see them when they're so thin. So they secrete substances. Secrete means to give off. So sweat glands, for example, those are part of your epithelial tissue. They just kind of dip down there, and then their specialized cells make sweat, produce a lot of liquid, a lot of water and salts to help cool us down. And they absorb substances. Again, your lungs, the alveoli in your lungs absorb the oxygen, the microvilli, remember that from first unit, and the intestines. Those are just highly folded, very thin epithelial tissue, which allow us to absorb the nutrients through our skin of our intestines and get them in the blood so we can use them. All right, so how is all this classified? Epithelial tissue is pretty easy to classify. It's the easiest of all things to classify. It's kind of fun if you make a game of it. So you get a simple epithelium means it has a single layer. So simple means one layer. That's for movement of materials across membranes. So these form membranes. So a top view of like the skin around the alveoli, the epithelium making up the alveoli of your lungs, it's very transparent. It's just a very thin cell, allows oxygen to go through. You can see the nuclei in there. They stain blue. The cross section from the side, here's a cross section of ducts, like sweat ducts, sweat glands that carry the sweat up to the surface. So if I move the little paint there, boom and boom, now you can see there's one layer of these cube-shaped epithelial cells. That's called simple cuboidal. And then the cells around the outside of them are connective tissue. Now, if it's got many layers, they call that stratified because strata means layered. So on the right side over here, that's a nice diagram I could use for a test because it would copy really well. And on the left side here, in color, you have pseudostratified, or sorry, just stratified epithelial tissue. It starts down here. Living tissue is multiplying. It comes up. It's still living and multiplying all of a sudden, see, blood vessels are down here. Up here, the blood doesn't reach these cells. These are some of the few cells in the body where blood doesn't come really close to. So the fluid seeps out of there and feeds these guys. They don't live long because they're constantly being pushed to the surface by more dividing cells at the base layer. The base layer pushes them up. They get up in here and they start filling up with protein. The ribosomes go crazy, putting off a whole lot of keratin protein and just fill the sacs up with protein, and they flatten out. They dry out, flatten out, and lock. And they make a nice barrier until you get the very surface up here, and then they're start breaking off and becoming dust. So the bacteria on the surface fall off, and this keeps pushing upwards, so we're protected by stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified means layered for protection. Squamous means flattened, squashed. So if I squashed, squamous, squash, squat, get flat. So they're flat cells. So stratified squamous, as this previous one shows, they're not squamous down here, but at top they are squamous and they're flattened. They flatten out as you get up top, so that's why we call them stratified squamous. Many layers of flattened cells. That's your outside skin. Simple squamous epithelium, like what's shown down here, is just one layer thin of cells, very thin. So that makes up your capillaries, your blood vessels, and the alveoli in the lungs, where small nutrients can cross through easily. Water can go right through it. Nutrients. Stratified squamous epithelial here's a nice close-up picture. You can see the stratified layers where it's flattened and how they cross-link. And there's some cells getting ready to slough off to make dust at top. So the external skin, no blood vessels touch these cells. I should put that in red maybe. No blood cell vessels touch the stratified squamous outer layers of cells, the stratum corneum. One of the very few times you will see in the body where capillaries do not come in close contact to the cells. Another place is the cornea of the eye, because if it were, we'd kind of see red. Cuboidal means they're cube-shaped. Again, here's a nice picture of some ducts, some glands, ducts from glands. And these are differentially dyed, so they show red, and the connective tissue behind it stays blue. So these are simple cuboidal, because there's one layer, and they're cube-shaped. This open area in the middle is called the lumen, which just means open area. There's no cells in there, just where the fluid flows through. Or saliva flows through it, or sweat flows through it, whatever type of duct it is. They're for secretion or absorption, and some cuboidals are for protection. If they got stratified cuboidal, but I'm not talking about that. So a kidney collecting duct. This could be a collecting duct in a kidney. I don't think it is. All right, columnar means columns. So you get these tall column shaped. This is simple columnar, very easy to see. One layer thick, tall columns, and the nuclei are all the same spot, so it's really easy to see it's columnar, simple columnar. And that's for secretion and absorption. So the respiratory tract, mucus producing cells like this, they call goblet cells because they produce mucus, kind of like on a goblet, you know. So those would be columnar, simple columnar. So number one from the pictures, a little review. Number one is our squamous epithelial, simple squamous. Two, one layer thin and cube-shaped, makes them simple cuboidal. And the next type, simple columnar in the digestive tract, making up your microvilli. Your microvilli, these little tiny folds, this is one layer coming up and it goes way high and curves back around down, comes back around again. In between these out here is nutrients that you just digested or someone digested in their intestine, getting ready to be absorbed into the simple columnar epithelium. So simple columnar, you can see really easy. Again, the nuclei all line up. Very easy to see it's one layer of columns. This next one, you see nuclei up here, nuclei down there, nuclei down there. It's up and down. And you also see a bunch of cilia on top of it too. So because it looks stratified, looks layered, looks like there's a layer, a layer, a layer, it's really one long column next to a long columnar cell, next to a long columnar cell. The nuclei just go up and down. So it's pseudo-stratified. Pseudo means false. It looks like it's stratified, but it's not. Oh, it's not. It's not. It looks like it's stratified, but it's not. The cilia, by the way, on top, pseudostratified are in your respiratory tract, upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract, and the cilia move the mucus from your schnoz down to your belly, your stomach, so the acid will take care of that. So pseudostratified looks stratified, but it's not. The way you could do that, use a little alliteration, say pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Get your S's going. Pseudostratified ciliated. See the cilia? Pretty much a giveaway, it's pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium. There's two main types. Type on the outside we call keratinized. It's the stuff exposed to the dry air, so it needs to form a bunch of locking cells to keep the body from losing a lot of water. Then there's the, because it's full of keratin protein. Then there's the stuff inside called the non-keratinized. So if you open this person's mouth up like this, open wide, there you go. Continuous with the outside of the cheek, go on the inside of the lip. Now you've got the inside of the cheek. It's all moist and covered with mucus. So everywhere from the mouth on down to the anus, that whole lining is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelial. Now we know it's stratified because when you swallow food, it's tearing away some of those cells, and you're swallowing some of your own cells. As food goes down the esophagus, it's pulling some of those cells with it. It's abrasive. As it goes through the intestines, it's pulling some cells off. It's abrasive. Everything is, all the way out to the end. But it's non-keratinized because it's moist. So it doesn't need to have keratin protein plates basically filling up the outside, locking to keep the moisture from escaping because you're swallowing saliva, you're keeping yourself wet inside. Okay, stratified squamous epithelium, the diagram view. You've got your connective tissue down here, and whenever you scratch yourself and start bleeding, you scratch down to the connective tissue because this layer of reproducing cells is fed from little blood vessels crossing underneath the connective tissue here. But up in the stratified squamous, you don't have blood vessels. You get squamous flat cells up here. They flatten out as they come up, fill up with keratin protein. That's a beautiful picture there. That'd be great for a test. Now, if it looks stratified and it's got a whole bunch of cells up and down and crazy, like, I mean, you got little cells up there, you got nuclei way up top. Pseudostratified doesn't have nuclei way up top, and this doesn't look columnar. That kind of looks like a mess. That's what we call transitional epithelium. It transitions. It goes from this, whoop, it's stretchable. It goes from this, and when it stretches out, they flatten out. So then it looks like stratified squamous, but not really because everything stretches out, not just the top layer. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This line's a urinary bladder. So this is like an empty bladder, the picture here. A full bladder would look stretched. Let me show you. Here's a cartoon rendition of a relaxed urinary bladder. You see the transitional epithelium up top. Looks like little cubes and columns and stuff all scattered up. But then when it's full, look, it flattens out. It gets really flat. So on the test, this looks kind of like stratified squamous, so I would not give you this diagram on a test. That wouldn't be fair. I'd give you this diagram on the test because this does look like stratified garbage, which only transitional epithelium looks like this. All right, so some review, super simple diagrams. Check these out, practice them. There's a nice little 1950 diagram of different places where you can find these things. Simple cuboidal, lining the kidney. Simple columnar in your intestines. Stratified squamous in your esophagus and the outside of your skin. Again, simple squamous lining the lungs. Okay, the next topic is talking about free surface characteristics of epithelial tissue. We're still talking about epithelial tissue. We know they're all smooth, especially on the inside of blood vessels, so blood can fly through nice and smoothly. So one characteristic is they're smooth. We're going to actually start notes part 2 right here, so there's a little transition. Ta-ta for now.